A document lies open under white light. The paper is heavy, watermarked, bound with a brass clip stamped Helios Therapeutics. The camera lingers on one line in embossed serif beneficiary Charlotte Hale, 4.2% of restricted equity shares. A manicured hand, steady, deliberate, slides the paper into a leather folder. At my husband's office, Gala. My place card didn't have my name. It said, "Pathetic gold digger nobody." They laughed. His boss, Vivian Ross, laughed the loudest. And when I walked out, I whispered to her, "I'd check your trust filings if I were you." Gold light spills from chandeliers, catching the reflection of crystal glasses and sequined gowns, the kind of corporate luxury that smells of power and ego. Waiters glide like choreography. A single table card sits upright at the center of the scene, its calligraphy elegant, deliberate, cruel, pathetic gold digger nobody. The sound of polite laughter cuts through the string quartet like static. A few guests cover their mouths, whispering, pretending it's a misunderstanding. It isn't. The camera finds Charlotte, mid-30s, blonde hair swept into a precise chignon. The calm posture of a woman who knows numbers can destroy empires. Her hand hovers over the card. Her husband, Ethan Hale, stands a few steps away, talking to investors. He sees it. He looks away. Vivian Ross, 40s, immaculate in a white satin suit, raises her glass toward Charlotte with a half smile, the kind that says, "You don't belong here." The laughter swells. Glasses clink. Charlotte breathes once deep, controlled. Then she picks up the card and studies it as if auditing a balance sheet. Her voice stays level. Her eyes caught the light hard. Reflective, lovely calligraphy. She sets the card down, picks up her clutch, turns toward the exit. The room's laughter lingers. Awkward now, like an aftertaste. Vivian's expression flickers curiosity, maybe surprised that Charlotte isn't crying. The power play doesn't land. Charlotte stops by the doorway. The camera pans close, her profile sharp under chandelier light. She leans toward Vivian, her tone calm enough to cut glass. "I'd check your trust filings if I were you." Vivian blinks, for the first time. Her smile falters. The music fades behind the closing doors. The hallway hums with muffled conversation and perfume. Charlotte walks, her heels clicking on marble in slow, steady rhythm. Outside, snow drifts across the Beacon Grand's front steps. A valet rushes forward, offering her coat. She doesn't stop. Her phone buzzes 3 unread texts from Ethan, one from Dana Foster still at the gala. "You okay, Charlotte?" Takes a photo of the place card in her hand, the insult gleaming beneath chandelier light, and sends it back with one line, "Pull Helios trust filings. Start with Ross Family Trust." She slips the card into her clutch like evidence. The cab door shuts. Through the rear window, the ballroom glows like a snow globe, warm, contained, oblivious. Charlotte watches the silhouettes moving inside Vivian's bright laughter, Ethan's glass raised in silent compliance. Her reflection overlays the city lights. And for a moment she looks like 2 women, one polished, humiliated, the other calculating. In finance, humiliation isn't the end. It's the audit trigger. The driver glances at her in the mirror. "Rough night," Charlotte smiles faintly. Not rough, just enlightening. He nods. Turns up the radio market news murmuring about volatile biotech shares. The irony makes her smile deepen. She opens her clutch. The place card rests on top of a folded paper thicker. Official? The corner shows a faint Helios logo and a stamped confidential trust agreement, draft. Her thumb traces the line beneath it. Beneficiary Charlotte Hale. Her eyes harden. She thought I came to that gala unarmed. Snow falls heavier, softening the streetlights, muting the sound of traffic. Inside the cab, the only noise is paper shifting quietly in Charlotte's hands, but numbers keep records of everything, and paper never forgets who signed what. The driver signals left. The city's skyline flashes by skyscrapers reflected in glass. She exhales. Steady now, almost serene. They'll think it was a joke, that I'll let it pass. But humiliation, when filed properly, becomes evidence. The cab stops at a red light. Through the fogged window, Charlotte watches a billboard advertising Helios Therapeutics, tomorrow's medicine, today. Her gaze lingers on the tagline. almost amused. Tomorrow's medicine. Let's see how their filings look tomorrow. She scrolls to her email drafts, attaches the photo of the trust document, types 2 words to Dana. Verify signatures? The light turns green. The cab pulls forward. Charlotte leans back, closing her eyes. The faintest smile at the corner of her mouth. The screen fades to black over her voice. Every fraud leaves a footprint, every betrayal. A paper trail. What would you have done in her place? Walk away? Or dig deeper? The screen glows pale blue against the winter light. Spreadsheets, filings, audit trails. Every cell balanced, every figure explained. Charlotte Hale's world has always been about order. She leans back in her chair, fingers wrapped around a mug of black coffee, eyes tracing a familiar skyline through the window, Beacon Hill rooftops, powdered with snow. Boston at 7 a.m. feels civilized, the city of the educated, the ambitious, and the quietly ruthless. Beside her desk, a framed photo, Yale graduation, 2009. She and Ethan younger, hungrier, 2 idealists in borrowed robes. He'd been magnetic then, restless energy, blue eyes that promised change, a brain wired for risk. She'd been the anchor, methodical, exacting, the one who made sure his dreams had line items and due diligence. We used to joke that he was the headline, and I was the footnote that kept it legal. Their partnership had worked for a while. After Yale, she'd joined a forensic accounting firm that specialized in cleaning up corporate messes before the SEC could. She liked numbers because they didn't lie, only people did. Within a few years, she was consulting independently, auditing companies' compliance departments, helping boards avoid disaster before it reached the front page. Ethan, meanwhile, had learned to translate charm into capital, startups, acquisitions, biotech strategy, whatever caught the market's fever. His talent wasn't invention, it was persuasion. Investors trusted him. People wanted to believe in him. When Helios Therapeutics came calling, it felt like destiny. A pharmaceutical company on the cusp of a record-breaking IPO, all glossy labs, glass offices, and billion-dollar promises. Ethan's title, Director of Mergers and Acquisitions. His mandate make Helios look good enough to buy anything and irresistible to everyone. Charlotte had read the offer letter twice. It's ambitious, she'd said. That's what makes it exciting, he'd replied, grinning. Back then. She hadn't noticed how ambition sounded different on him, sharper, impatient, almost hungry. The building is a monument of mirrored glass and understatement, rising from the Charles River like it owns the reflection. Inside. Everything gleams from the chrome elevator panels to the digital stock ticker running silently across the lobby. Charlotte remembers the first time she visited. She'd worn a navy suit and tried not to look impressed. Ethan had been proud, introducing her to coworkers, shaking hands with security guards by name. Then he said it. You have to meet Vivian. Vivian Ross, Chief Financial Officer of Helios Therapeutics, a name that carried weight across the industry Harvard MBA. Fortune 40 under 40 keynote speaker at every major biotech summit. Her legend preceded her precision wrapped in Prada. When she walked into the glass conference room, Charlotte felt the temperature drop. Vivian had that kind of presence, all eyes instinctively adjusting to her rhythm. Her sentences landed like decisions already made. Vivian extended a hand. Charlotte Hale. The forensic mind. I've read your work on off-balance sheet liabilities. Charlotte smiled politely. Flattering. Though most people find that paper dull. Vivian's lips curved slightly. Only people who don't understand how power hides its mistakes. For a moment, there was respect or the recognition of equals. Then Ethan placed a hand on Vivian's elbow as he laughed about something. And the moment vanished. Later that evening, Charlotte caught a glimpse of them across the atrium, Ethan leaning close as Vivian whispered something with a conspiratorial smile. It looked harmless. Looked. Their condo near Back Bay was tastefully minimalist leather, glass, quiet money. 2 people who'd built comfort out of discipline. Dinner that night was slow, deliberate. Charlotte talked about a client under SEC review. Ethan talked about Vivian. She's incredible, he said, pouring wine. She thinks 5 moves ahead of everyone. She told me my M&A models read like someone who's been inside the boardroom for decades. Charlotte smiled. And you like that. She's been mentoring me. Char said I have a CFO's instincts. He meant it as gratitude. She heard it as prophecy. Every empire begins with a mentor who believes they can build you and ends when you realize they were only building themselves. An invitation arrives by courier thick paper, embossed in gold. Helios Therapeutics, Annual Investor Gala, celebrating our growth. Ethan leaves it on the counter, nonchalant. Charlotte picks it up. Formal black tie. He shrugs. Vivian's idea. She loves her grand gestures. Vivian again. Always Vivian. Her name threaded through every dinner conversation, every phone alert, every anecdote about success. Charlotte tells herself it's professional admiration, but admiration doesn't smell like perfume on a husband's collar at midnight. And professional emails don't end with, "See you soon." V. A spreadsheet flickers across her screen. She's reviewing a client's financial disclosure, but her eyes keep landing on the word trust. She thinks about Helios's IPO, about Ethan's new bonus structure, about Vivian's immaculate detachment. Trusts are complicated things, half transparency, half illusion, in finance. The most dangerous word is trust. It looks virtuous. It hides everything. She closes the laptop, stands by the window, watching the city lights shimmer across the Charles. Somewhere out there, Ethan is probably still in a meeting, or a dinner, or somewhere he doesn't need to explain. Charlotte sips her wine and tells herself it's fine. It's always fine until someone writes your name wrong on purpose. The first sign came quietly, like a digit misplaced in a flawless balance sheet. Charlotte noticed it on a Wednesday. Ethan's tone over dinner had changed faster, sharper, threaded with the faint impatience of someone who'd already had the conversation in his head and was waiting for you to catch up. He spoke about Helios as if it were a living organism, something he was feeding, shaping, destined to control. "She wants me to present at the board review next quarter," he said, slicing into his steak. "Vivian thinks I'm ready to lead a division." "Vivian thinks," Charlotte echoed, gently. Ethan smiled at the correction but didn't answer. Instead, he checked his phone, thumb hovering over a notification that flashed briefly Ross, V, before he turned it face down. She didn't ask. Not yet. They had a rule, once everything on the table, but the longer he stayed at Helios, the more things seemed to move into the later pile later discussions, later explanations, later honesty. When he came home that night, the faint scent of something unfamiliar clung to his suit, sharp and expensive. Charlotte knew the perfume. Byredo Accord Oud. Vivian wore it at the investor mixer 2 months earlier. She'd mentioned liking unisex scents that smell like control. Charlotte folded the thought away like a receipt she might need later. The next morning, while Ethan left for an early strategy meeting, Charlotte opened their shared Amex statement to schedule payments. She didn't mean to look. But a charge stood out Copley in Maine, private dining room reservation. 1 Div-ma 47. The date matched the night Ethan claimed he'd been at the Cambridge office. She double-checked her memory. He'd called around 9, apologizing for one more round of revisions with the M&A team. She could hear faint jazz in the background. He'd said it was a Spotify ad. Now she knew the playlist was real, just not on his phone. She closed the browser and stared at the screen until her reflection blurred with the spreadsheet behind it. In her world, lies had patterns, repetition, round numbers, symmetry. People who lied were always consistent in their mistakes. Ethan, for all his ambition, wasn't exceptional enough to be original in betrayal. Still, she wasn't the type to throw a wine glass or cry on bathroom tiles. She made lists. By Friday. The list read, changed passwords on his laptop 2 weeks ago. Keeps Helios folder on external drive. New cufflinks gifted, not purchased. Mentioned Vivian's mentorship 5 times this week. She deleted the list, then rewrote it on paper. Paper was harder to trace. That weekend, he suggested a short trip to Nantucket. Just us. He said, "We've both been buried in work." She agreed. She wanted to watch him, unfiltered. The drive was quiet, the kind of silence that feels polite but not comfortable. They stayed at a waterfront inn, ate lobster rolls in the late autumn wind. Ethan seemed lighter away from the city, talking about beach houses and IPO celebrations, but even there, Helios shadowed him like a second marriage. Vivian thinks we're underestimating the European market, he said, staring at the horizon. Charlotte traced the rim of her glass. You say her name like she's your conscience. He laughed. Maybe too quickly. She's just sharp. You'd like her if you got to know her. I've met her, Charlotte said. Twice. He looked at her then, just a second too long, as if calculating how much she'd seen, back in Boston. The distance between them became measurable, 1 unread text, 2 dinners missed, 3 weekends rescheduled. The apartment felt like a museum exhibit of their old life success arranged neatly on shelves, warmth archived, then came the envelope. It arrived on thick stationery embossed with the Helios logo, an invitation to the annual investor gala at the Beacon Grand. Ethan left it on the counter, unopened. Charlotte noticed the subtle smudge of foundation on the flap when she picked it up later. Not hers, not her shade. She turned the envelope over. Inside was a gold card, engraved with 2 names, Mr. Ethan Hale, guest of the board. There was no mention of her. When she asked about it, he smiled. A little too casual. It's mostly investors and leadership. Spouses can come. But it's optional. Boring finance talk. Boring finance talk, she repeated. That's my native language. He chuckled, kissed her cheek. Next year? Okay. That night. She lay awake listening to the rhythm of his breathing, even and distant. The clock ticked in neat. Forensic intervals. Charlotte thought of her career years spent untangling other people's falsified ledgers, tracking how greed disguised itself as ambition. She had exposed men who moved millions through shell accounts just to impress women they secretly resented. And now, irony had circled back. Immaculate and cruel, she turned over, staring at the ceiling. If she had learned one thing from years in finance, it was that every illusion collapses when the numbers stop reconciling, and Ethan's numbers were starting to bleed. When morning came, he left early again. She watched his taillights disappear down Commonwealth Avenue, then opened her laptop. Helios Therapeutics, public filings, pre-IPO trust structures, officer compensation. Her cursor hovered over the search bar. She typed Ross Family Trust, Helios filings, and hit enter. The results loaded slowly, but even before the first document appeared, Charlotte felt the chill of certainty crawl through her chest. Somewhere in those filings, in those carefully redacted schedules and footnotes, was the real reason Vivian Ross laughed so easily at other women's humiliation. Charlotte leaned forward, eyes narrowing. If there was one language both women spoke fluently, it was paper, and soon. One of them would discover that in finance as in marriage, trust is never free. Morning light slanted across the apartment, pale and cold through the floor-to-ceiling windows. Charlotte had been up since 6, answering client emails. Her second mug of coffee gone cold beside the keyboard. Ethan had left early again breakfast with Vivian before the board call the words tossed over his shoulder like loose change. When she finally stood to stretch, the sudden whir of the printer broke the silence. It sputtered once, twice, and began feeding out a sheet of heavy bond paper. Though she hadn't sent anything to print, she frowned, crossed the room, and caught the page before it slid to the floor. Vivian Ross Irrevocable Trust. The title sat in bold, centered at the top, below it. A list of signatories, legal boilerplate, and then the line that made her heart pause. Contingent trustee Ethan Hale. For a long beat, she just stared. It wasn't uncommon for executives to appear in corporate trusts, at least not superficially. But this one wasn't issued by Helios Therapeutics. The drafting entity was a private offshore firm, Ross Consolidated Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands, and there, near the bottom margin. In the smallest of footnotes, subject to merger closing and shareholder approval. Charlotte's pulse steadied, then slowed, the way it always did when her mind shifted into forensic mode. She carried the page back to her desk and spread it flat beside her laptop. The watermark shimmered faintly under the light, authentic legal stationery, not a mock-up. Ethan must have printed it by accident while compiling investor packets. The symbols of deception were all their irrevocable trust. Shareholder approval. Contingent trustee. It looked benign enough to anyone outside finance, but to her trained eyes it screamed insider enrichment scheme. She opened a new spreadsheet, out of reflex, and began mapping the pattern. If Vivian Ross had created a personal trust, and Ethan was listed as contingent trustee, it meant one of two things: either she was transferring equity to him in anticipation of a merger, or he was fronting ownership for shares that couldn't legally be in her name before the IPO. Either way, it was a crime dressed as strategy. She leaned back, hands clasped loosely. For years, Charlotte had buried her instincts under diplomacy, playing the patient wife who didn't question her husband's new vocabulary growth projections, capital synergy, internal restructuring. Now, each phrase rearranged itself into a confession she'd missed. She glanced toward the bedroom. The closet door stood ajar, Ethan's suits lined up in corporate symmetry. Last week. He'd mentioned Vivian setting up a trust vehicle for executive bonuses. She'd smiled, thinking it was metaphorical. Now she realized it was literal. Charlotte turned on the scanner, fed the page through, and saved it as VR Trust Chart Draft. PDF. The printer's memory showed several prior documents deleted, but not overwritten. She extracted the cache, found fragments of Helios letterhead, pages titled Restricted Equity Grant, Draft B. Her thumb hovered over delete. She didn't press it, instead. She compressed the files and stored them on an encrypted drive, a habit left over from her SEC years. The whir of the drive sounded almost conspiratorial. Outside. A snowplow passed, scraping the silence. She read the document again. Slower this time. Tasting every word like a lawyer reading an indictment, trustee empowered to execute holding transfers in the event of merger completion or equity reallocation event. Subject to discretion of settler Vivian Ross. Trustee empowered Ethan Hale. She let out a short, humorless breath. So this was how Vivian rewarded loyalty hidden equity, parked offshore until the IPO lockup expired. Ethan must have believed it was clever and invisible thank you for silence. Charlotte opened her notebook and wrote a single line in neat handwriting: find link between Ross Family Trust and Helios Therapeutics pre-IPO filings. Then she drew a box around it. The beginning of a case file. Her phone buzzed with a text. Dana lunch today, need to vent about a client cooking numbers. Charlotte typed back, can't. Just found something interesting at home. Will call tonight. She didn't add details. Dana had once been her colleague at the SEC, and old habits die hard. They both knew you never texted specifics. The apartment felt suddenly foreign, as if everything in it had shifted 1 inch to the left. The coffee, the furniture, even the framed wedding photo on the bookshelf, Ethan in his tux, hand resting on her shoulder. Back then, that hand had meant partnership. Now it looked like ownership. Charlotte folded the document carefully, sliding it into a plain envelope and tucking it behind the tax binders in her cabinet. She knew better than to confront him now. Men like Ethan didn't confess. They waited until the evidence spoke louder than they could, and evidence had a voice she knew how to amplify. Her computer chimed an automated alert from the Bloomberg terminal she still paid to access. Helios Therapeutics. IPO date confirmed Q2. She stared at the headline. 3 months. That's how long before those hidden trusts would convert. And Vivian Ross's secret beneficiaries, Ethan included, would become multimillionaires overnight. Charlotte closed her eyes, letting the information settle. She wasn't angry yet. Not exactly. What she felt was the clinical detachment of someone preparing for an audit, the same feeling she'd had before dismantling a hedge fund's fraudulent statements or exposing a CEO's falsified filings. The difference now was personal. When she opened her eyes, they were steady, calculating. She slipped the encrypted drive into her bag, smoothed the papers on her desk, and straightened the corners until they aligned perfectly. Order restored. At least on the surface. Later. When Ethan came home whistling about new growth opportunities, she smiled, poured him a drink, and asked about his day. Her voice was even, her hands calm. He never noticed the printer tray was empty. That night, long after he'd fallen asleep, Charlotte sat on the living room floor with her laptop. The city beyond the window was a constellation of other people's secrets. Flickering across the Charles River, she said quietly, "You printed the wrong page?" Ethan. The screen reflected in her eyes like light off a blade. The wrong page and the right proof. The call to Dana felt like an admission and a promise at once. Charlotte dialed with the phone cupped against her shoulder. The city's winter hush pressed against the windows. Dana Foster answered on the second ring direct. Brisk. Voice that had broken more whistleblower narratives than most men had made PowerPoint decks. Dana, Charlotte said, keeping the edge from her tone. How close are you to caffeine? Dana asked. Because I'm on my third, and I have bad news. Charlotte let out a short breath. I'd rather hear it sober. There was a pause. Then Helios has been on our radar for irregular pre-IPO transfers for months. Word is, there are trust vehicles linked to executive compensation that don't reconcile with public filings. We've pinged counsel, but nothing formal yet. Why Charlotte watched the river reflect the morning light and felt the same quiet precision she brought to every audit. I found a draft trust document in my house. Vivian Ross Irrevocable Trust. Ethan listed as contingent trustee. A low whistle from the other end. That's not a coincidence. Be careful. Char. If that paper is real, you're holding something hot. Don't touch anything you can't explain. I won't. Charlotte said, I want you to look at something. I'll send a scan. Off the record. Off the record, Dana repeated. You know how that goes. Send it encrypted. Charlotte promised she would. She ended the call with a careful, Dana, if it's as bad as it looks. Don't let them sweep it under the rug. Wouldn't dream of it. Dana said, but let me do my part. You be prudent. Prudent. That morning. The word felt like a chastening. Charlotte sat with the idea for less than an hour. Prudence did not mean passivity. Prudence, in her profession, meant triangulation confirm the paper, map the transactions, create a trail that could be followed legally and publicly. It meant building a case that would survive scrutiny. She hadn't planned to dig through Ethan's things. She'd always respected privacy between spouses until privacy became a cloak for transactions that would cost ordinary people their savings. But the trust draft had come out of his home printer. It was a gap in the narrative as obvious as a misfiled ledger. For a forensic accountant, gaps were invitations. She told herself she was only looking for context. The truth is, she was looking for a pattern. Ethan's laptop was on the kitchen island. Its lid opened to a screensaver he left active when he was in a rush. He'd left for another strategy breakfast with Vivian and, like all men in the early stage of a promotion, he'd carried his ambition in a hurry that left small, telling traces. Charlotte inhaled, steadied. The first rule document, don't destroy. She placed a small USB drive at the ready and opened his file system, moving with the careful decisiveness of someone unhurt by adrenaline. There it sat, a folder buried beneath innocuous names, Helios Presentation, Confidential Raw Sphere. The parenthesis made her eyes narrow. Someone had versioned the file for Vivian. She clicked. Presentations, draft memos, innocuous photos from a company retreat, then a spreadsheet. Its title blinked on the screen, Option Vesting Schedule, Q, Draft, Excel at 6. Her throat went dry in that way it always did before a number revealed its secret. She opened the sheet. The spreadsheet was clinical rows of names, dates, and a pattern that shouldn't exist. Rows marched like soldiers. The dates aligned with the footnote she'd found on the trust draft subject to merger closing and shareholder approval. And then, the line that made her insides rotate with crystalline clarity, a vesting event scheduled the exact day Vivian's draft trust listed as the transfer date shares earmarked. Beneficiary deferred. Trustee blank until contingent trustee executed. Ethan's name sat in the trustee column in a cell formatted bold and obvious markers someone meant to notice. It was the kind of slip that happened when people treated wrongdoing like a spreadsheet, exercised comfort with the euphemism of compliance. Casual with the syntax of concealment? Charlotte's fingers didn't tremble while she duplicated the file. Forensic training kicked in, timestamp everything. Preserve metadata, mirror the trail. She copied the spreadsheet, exported a PDF, and encrypted the bundle, then moved the copies onto her own external drive, the one she used for client work, the one Dana knew about. She labeled it Helios Vesting Confidential, Hail, and secured it with a passphrase that was a sentence, the way she'd learned in a compliance seminar years ago, as she worked. A small prickle of anger rose, the slow burn that didn't scorch so much as sharpen. Ethan had always known her mind like a tool he could set aside, He'd chosen ambition, and ambition had a gravity that pulled people into orbit around someone like Vivian. The draft trust, the vesting schedule, these were not mistakes. They were the architecture of enrichment. She closed Ethan's laptop gently, like closing the lid on a ledger she'd just balanced. Then she placed the encrypted drive in her desk drawer, behind tax folders and old client binders. It was safer there. Under layers of professional mundanity, Dana had been right. Helios was on the SEC radar. Her call with Dana had already created a slow-moving reaction inside an agency machine. Charlotte's discovery had accelerated the timeline. She could feel it like the tension before lightning. But public exposure required a stage, not just documents. The Gala would be that stage. Her mind mapped options with forensic calm, an anonymous tip to Dana that could trigger a quiet inquiry, a whistleblower submission, public exposure through a journalist. The problem was timing. Helios's IPO was scheduled in 3 months. Insider transactions could vaporize investor trust, and with it, the company's valuation overnight. If she wanted the truth to surface in a way that would not only punish wrongdoing, but protect shareholders and employees, she needed evidence that could be tied to a person and a moment. That's where the Gala came in. Vivian thrived on spectacle. She loved control performed at scale boardroom theater, curated applause, the kind of event that made people believe a company's future was inevitable. If there was a place where visible power and invisible ownership overlapped, it would be there, under chandeliers and microphones. Charlotte pictured the banquet hall, Vivian presiding, Ethan placed like a trophy beside her. She imagined the room's attention, the camera flashes, the people who would wear curiosity like jewelry, and she imagined herself in that room not as a shrinking wife, but as a professional with evidence in her pocket and an audience around her. She closed her notebook and wrote a single plan in precise handwriting. Attend Gala. Observe. Document. Don't confront. Build public-facing evidence. She left a white envelope on the counter with nothing more than a post-it note. Be home by 9. For Ethan. It would be a mild chide. For Charlotte, it was a cover. She dressed in neutral colors, nothing to scream for attention. She would be presentable enough to belong, invisible enough to watch. Before she left, she texted Dana a single encrypted note. I'll be there in person. Gala. Bring anything you want on the record. The reply came almost instantly. Be careful. And bring receipts. Charlotte smiled at the screen and slipped the encrypted drive into the small clutch she meant to carry that night. Paper. After all. Keep score better than people. The beacon grand shimmered. A monument polished for investors. Velvet drapes. Champagne towers. A small orchestra tucked beneath a banner that read, in gold, serif Helios Therapeutics, building tomorrow's trust. Charlotte almost laughed at the irony. Trust? Of course. She arrived precisely on time, never early, never late, her navy dress tailored clean, the pearls understated. She wasn't here to compete with anyone's spectacle. She was here to watch how people performed power when they thought no one was keeping score. The ballroom pulsed with confidence and expensive perfume. Waiters glided between clusters of executives and venture capitalists. She caught sight of Vivian Ross, radiant under the chandeliers, her white gown cut like armor. The crowd rotated around her orbit, and beside her, exactly where she expected, stood Ethan smiling, polished, a little too eager. He looked smaller than she remembered in that sea of ambition, like someone playing a role in a story written by someone else. Vivian spotted Charlotte first. Charlotte Hale, she said, voice honeyed and high enough for the nearby table to hear. You made it. We weren't sure you would. The subtext was surgical. We didn't plan for you to. Charlotte smiled. Wouldn't miss it. After all, you're celebrating trust. Vivian's brow twitched just once too slight for the cameras, but enough to confirm Charlotte's suspicion. Right this way, Vivian said smoothly. You'll be seated near the center. Perfect view of the stage. Charlotte followed, the hem of her dress brushing marble. The room was a tableau of silverware and investor laughter. She felt the heat of cameras flashing near the front. Then Vivian stopped beside a table dressed in white linen and gestured with theatrical graciousness. Here we are. Charlotte leaned forward to read the calligraphy on the place cards. One said Daniel Quirk, board advisor. Another, Marina Klein, partner, Albright Capital. then hers. Pathetic gold digger nobody. The lettering was flawless, expensive ink on thick cardstock. For a heartbeat. The world went silent. Then came the ripple, stifled chuckles. Someone whispering. A woman gasping. That can't be real. Vivian tilted her head. The picture of mock concern. Oh dear. A misprint. Surely. Technology can be cruel. The line worked like a spark. Laughter spread. Controlled. Polite the sound of cruelty dressed for dinner. Charlotte felt it wash over her. Hot and precise. Across the room. Ethan froze mid-conversation. He looked down at his wine glass, tracing the stem with one finger. He didn't move, didn't speak, didn't defend. Vivian smiled wider. You know how printers are with templates, always misplacing the names. The crowd laughed again, softer, nervous. People adore humiliation as long as it's labeled humor. Charlotte's lips parted, but not in protest. A calm clarity settled over her. She reached down, lifted the card, turned it under the light as if inspecting an artifact. Then she placed it neatly in her clutch. Lovely calligraphy, she said. Voice measured. Yours? Vivian's smile flickered. Excuse me. Charlotte met her eyes. No worries. I'll make sure it's cited properly later. And with that, she turned and walked toward the ballroom doors. The laughter faltered, confused by dignity. Outside. The air was sharp, snow just beginning to fall. She exhaled once long, deliberate before pulling out her phone. The place card gleamed under the amber lights. She took a single photo, centered, steady, and opened her encrypted email draft. To Dana Foster, subject Helios Gala, live attachment, trust walk draft, PDF message. Cross-reference this with Form S1. You'll see the timing. She hit send. Then she dialed Dana's direct line. Dana picked up on the second ring, voice low. Tell me you're not still inside that circus. Charlotte's tone was calm enough to sound dangerous. They just handed me a souvenir. What happened? They made a joke with my name on it. Printed it. Actually, I'm sending you the file Vivian tried to bury Draft Trust plus the vesting schedule. Check their filings against pre-IPO disclosures. There's a date alignment that's going to make your ethics team salivate. Charlotte, do it tonight, she said. The SEC clock runs fast when the spotlight's warm. Dana hesitated. You're walking away from this. Right, not into it. Charlotte looked back through the hotel's glass doors. Inside. Vivian was already raising a toast, the room roaring approval. Ethan was beside her, clapping. His wedding ring caught the light and flashed like mockery. I'm walking away, she said quietly. For now. She ended the call. The valet approached, nervous in the cold. Mrs. Jackie, hail, your car. Yes, thank you. Inside the cab, the city blurred into streaks of gold and snow. Charlotte rested her clutch on her lap, the offensive place card still inside. It looked almost delicate, as if a cruel idea could masquerade as art. She turned the card over and, in her mind, began to see the bigger picture, the trust, the vesting schedule, the IPO announcement, all threads converging on the same date. Vivian hadn't just humiliated her, she'd drawn attention to herself in a way only arrogance could. That was the thing about people like Vivian Ross. They never imagined the accountant's wife had once written reports that triggered federal subpoenas. Charlotte's phone vibrated again. A message from Dana. Got the file. You're right. Trust schedule matches pre-IPO share lockup. This isn't minor, it's fraud territory. Charlotte smiled faintly. Her reflection in the car window looked composed, even serene. Fraud territory. She'd spent her career dissecting it in others. Tonight. It had come home wrapped in pearls and champagne. The cab slowed at a traffic light. Outside. The Beacon Grand loomed in the mirror, glittering. Oblivious. Proud, she whispered to herself. Barely audible. Check your trust filings. Vivian. Every line, every footnote. Then she leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the engine's hum drown out the sound of laughter still echoing in her memory. Everyone in that ballroom thought the night's entertainment was over. They were wrong. The real show had just begun. 10 days after the gala, the air in Boston turned knife cold. Snow fell in sheets across the Charles. but inside the mirrored glass tower of Helios Therapeutics. Heat pulsed the kind that only came from panic in a boardroom. That morning. The Boston Business Ledger leaked a headline: SEC opens preliminary inquiry into Helios Trust filings. Subtext: anonymous whistleblower triggers review of pre-IPO transfers. Charlotte read it at her kitchen counter, stirring coffee she never drank. The article was thin on detail, SEC statements always were, but the timing was perfect. 10 days. Exactly long enough for an anonymous email to travel through compliance, hit a desk, and trigger a call no one wanted to answer. When the courier arrived that afternoon with a cream envelope embossed Helios Therapeutics, special board session, Charlotte smiled without surprise. Spouse is optional, of course. The next morning. She dressed not like a guest, but like a verdict charcoal suit, black silk blouse, hair pinned back with surgical precision, no jewelry except her wedding band, gleaming like irony. Outside Helios headquarters, cameras were already gathering. Someone had tipped the press about a meeting of interest. The building gleamed, as if denial could be polished. Inside. She gave her name to security. The receptionist blinked. I believe this meeting is internal. Mrs. Hale? Charlotte smiled. Calm as winter glass. It concerns my household. Actually, I'll only be a minute. When the elevator doors opened to the executive floor, she stepped into a corridor lined with awards, fastest growing biotech, most innovative IPO candidate, 40 under 40. Every plaque looked suddenly like evidence. At the end of the corridor, through frosted glass, voices rose clipped, frantic. She could recognize Ethan's, and above it, Vivian Ross, still performing calm. The assistant outside the boardroom stood abruptly. Ma'am, this is a closed session. Charlotte pushed the door open, then consider it open. The boardroom was a theater of money mahogany table, skyline view, a dozen men in dark suits. At the head sat Richard Keene, the CEO, old Boston money, silver hair, cautious smile, next to him. Vivian immaculate as ever, her tone sweet poison. Charlotte, she said, the word almost purring. What a surprise. We didn't expect I know, Charlotte said, walking toward the table. Spouse is optional. But I read the agenda. I'm a stakeholder now. The men exchanged glances. Ethan's eyes were wide, a storm of confusion and dread. Vivian. Perhaps we should, he began. Vivian cut him off with a manicured hand. It's fine. Mrs. Hale's timing is poetic. We're simply addressing a minor regulatory misunderstanding. Charlotte set her leather folder on the polished table, the sound of paper snapping the room into stillness. Misunderstanding, she repeated softly. That's one word for fraud. A ripple moved across the room, surprise, discomfort, curiosity. The CEO frowned. Mrs. Hale, you're not a member of this board. I'm a forensic accountant, she said evenly, and a wife. Both professions require identifying lies. Vivian exhaled through a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You have no idea what you've stepped into. Mrs. Hale, these are complex equity structures, not what Charlotte asked. Cutting in, not numbers on paper. Because those, I understand. She reached into her folder and withdrew the trust document thick, embossed, the logo gleaming under fluorescent light. She slid it across the table to the CEO. Vivian Ross Irrevocable Trust, she said, every syllable measured. Draft printed from my home printer. My husband's credentials were used to access the company server that week. The CEO adjusted his glasses, scanning the lines. Is this authentic? Read the footnote, Charlotte said, subject to merger closing and shareholder approval. That approval came from this board, without disclosure of the contingent trustee, Ethan Hale? Vivian laughed. Brittle. That's absurd. Ethan had no access to confidential. Charlotte held up her phone, except this email. The screen glowed bright as judgment. On it, forwarded message subject, option vesting schedule, Ross Fur. Sent by Ethan Hale from his Helios account. Time stamped 11:02 p.m. to Vivian Ross. Attachment restricted equity, grant draft B, XLXX. Every man at the table leaned forward. The CEO's voice lowered. Vivian, can you explain this? Vivian's nails tapped the table once, twice. He sent it for review. Routine. The data was preliminary. Charlotte opened her folder again. Then why does your signature appear on the finalized filing submitted to the SEC 2 weeks later? She withdrew the final sheet of printed Form 13D filing, investor disclosure of beneficial ownership, dated exactly 1 week before the gala. Her finger tapped the bottom line. Signatures Vivian Ross, CFO, Ethan Hale, Director of M&A. The document glinted under the overhead lights like a loaded weapon. The silence that followed had texture the kind that fills a courtroom just before the verdict. Outside, somewhere far below, a siren wailed through the city. The CEO looked at Vivian, then Ethan, his tone measured but sharp. Is this your signature? Ms. Ross. Vivian's mouth opened. Closed. It's a draft. Is it your signature? Yes, she said finally, voice tight as wire. Then you've both authorized undisclosed share transfers prior to IPO, he said. That's insider trading. Someone inhaled sharply. Ethan's face went gray. Vivian told me, but Vivian was already gathering her papers, color draining from her skin. This is out of context, she said. Every executive uses trusts to manage equity. Charlotte's voice cut through her defense, calm and lethal. Not trusts registered offshore with non-disclosed beneficiaries, not trusts using employees' names to conceal ownership. You didn't build an expansion model. Vivian, you built a laundering mechanism? The words hit like gunfire muffled by silk. Richard Keene rose from his chair, slow and deliberate. Security, he said quietly. The assistant by the door hesitated, then nodded and stepped out. Vivian turned to Charlotte, eyes flashing. You don't understand what you've started. Oh, I do, Charlotte said. You built your fortune on trust. I just made people stop trusting you. The CEO faced Ethan next. Mr. Hale, consider yourself suspended pending review. Ethan tried to speak, but his voice cracked. Charlotte, please. She turned to him. Steady. You forwarded the files. You stayed silent while they mocked me. Silence has consequences. Then she gathered her papers and stood. Around her, no one moved. The air was thick with the kind of quiet that follows an explosion dust, disbelief, and the sound of power collapsing. As she reached the door, the CEO's voice echoed behind her. Mrs. Hale, you said you were a forensic accountant? She paused. I still am. Would you be willing to assist our counsel? Charlotte glanced back at Vivian, who sat frozen, her empire unraveling in real time, then at Ethan, who couldn't meet her eyes. I'll send my rates, she said softly, and left the room. The door closed behind her final as a gavel strike. The snow had begun to melt when the real work started. Boston's winter light turned thin and silver, and Charlotte Hale no longer wore pearls. She wore purpose. Her mornings began not in her old kitchen, but in a small corner office on Boylston Street, 1 window, 2 monitors, and a lockbox full of evidence. The doorplate read, Hale Forensic Consulting, LLC. To anyone else, it looked like a quiet restart. In truth, it was a war room. The day after the board meeting, Dana Foster met her at a diner on Tremont, away from Helios headquarters and any cameras. Dana arrived in jeans and a parka that disguised her government badge, hair damp from sleet. You detonated something, she said without preamble. Sliding into the booth, SEC enforcement is assembling a task group. The documents you brought match 2 internal reports about trust transfers. Charlotte stirred her coffee. How bad? Dana's mouth curved. For them, catastrophic. For you, potentially messy, unless we formalize your cooperation. Charlotte nodded. Already expecting it? Whistleblower immunity. Dana nodded. Exactly. You submit everything you have through the proper channel. You're protected under Dodd-Frank, full immunity, and a cut of any sanctions if the case sticks. Charlotte's lips tightened. I don't care about the payout. I know, Dana said, her tone softening. But take the immunity. It's not about guilt. It's about shielding yourself from what they'll try next. That afternoon, Charlotte spent 6 hours drafting the submission every date, every file, every metadata trace. She wrote as if preparing a closing argument, calm, clinical, indisputable. The evidence stack read like a corporate thriller. VR Trust, AJ Draft, PDF, printed on home printer, time-stamped with Ethan's credentials. Option vesting, schedule, Q2, draft, XLSX, data correlation between trust creation and insider grant approval. Form 13D filing, dual signature of Vivian Ross and Ethan Hale. When she finished, Dana called from DC, package received. You'll get acknowledgement from the whistleblower office within 72 hours. You did good. Charlotte. Charlotte looked around her half-unpacked office boxes, case files, the faint smell of cardboard and new beginnings. I didn't do it for good, she said quietly. I did it for balance. Balance also meant closing one chapter entirely. 2 days later, she met her divorce attorney, Ellen Marks. In a glass-walled firm overlooking the river, Ellen was the kind of woman who could freeze a banker mid-sentence with a single raised eyebrow. Your prenup, Ellen said, flipping through a bound folder, paragraph 14, subsection C. In the event of any criminal or civil investigation involving one spouse's financial conduct, the marital assets shall be placed under temporary protective escrow in the uninvolved spouse's name until legal clearance is granted. Clever clause. Charlotte. Who drafted this? I did, Charlotte said, unblinking. I believed in contingency planning. Ellen smiled, impressed. Then we activate it now. The Helios inquiry qualifies. Ethan's exposure makes this immediate within 48 hours. Charlotte's financial life was transferred into a clean shell of legality escrow accounts, real estate titles, investment portfolios, all temporarily in her control under the supervision of the probate court. Every asset Ethan thought was theirs was now hers to safeguard. Ellen looked up from the paperwork. Once this is filed, Ethan can't liquidate or move anything without your authorization. Charlotte signed the page, then file it before he remembers what I'm capable of. By the end of that week, her name disappeared from the old Back Bay apartment directory. She moved into a smaller penthouse near the financial district modern, glassy, a view of the harbor that glittered like data points. At night, she worked with a quiet hum of her new office equipment and the city lights reflected in the windows. That's when the call came from Ravenhold Capital, a mid-sized hedge fund known for one thing, shorting companies that lied. Mrs. Hale, said a voice on speakerphone, clipped and courteous. We read your analysis of Helios's accounting pattern. We're considering a strategic position. Would you consult for us? Charlotte hesitated only a moment. You mean you're betting against them? We're betting on the truth, the voice said smoothly. And we'd like your expertise to confirm it. She smiled, unseen. My hourly rate just doubled. For the next week. Charlotte dissected Helios's filings the way a surgeon traces arteries. She knew exactly where to look: unreported R&D capitalization, misaligned trust transfers, valuation inflation. She didn't fabricate a single number. She simply illuminated what was already there. Ravenhold's analysts used her report to adjust exposure quietly but legally. Dana called her once during those nights. Just checking you're staying on the legal side of the line. Always, Charlotte said. I'm not manipulating the market. I'm preparing it. You sound almost calm. Dana observed. This isn't revenge. It's due diligence. But deep down, Charlotte knew it was both. When the SEC inquiry leaked to the press 2 weeks later, Helios's valuation began to tremble. Investors asked questions. Bankers demanded revisions. And every time Vivian Ross issued a statement of full cooperation, Ravenhold's traders smiled. Charlotte watched the stock ticker slide 1 pixel at a time, her reflection superimposed on the falling graph. She wasn't gloating. She was observing balance restore itself. Her lawyer texted escrow secured. Ethan filed for counsel representation. He's panicking. Charlotte didn't reply. She simply closed her laptop, poured herself a glass of Merlot, and stepped onto the balcony below. Boston's lights flickered across the harbor, the skyline steady and indifferent for the first time in months. Her heart didn't race. There was no anger left, only precision. She whispered to the night, You built your empire on trust. Vivian, I built mine on truth. Then she turned back to her desk, where the next file waited, labeled neatly Helios Phase 2, Public Reckoning. The countdown had begun. The headline hit the internet like an explosion muffled by glass. Helios, CFO under federal investigation for trust manipulation. Push notifications chimed across phones and trading screens. The story was everywhere: financial news shows, Twitter threads dissecting filings, and a dozen sober op-eds trying to parse how a promising IPO had turned into a regulatory nightmare. Charlotte read the article in the quiet of her office, the city reflected in the glass like data points. The byline credited an unnamed source, an anonymous forensic whistleblower whose analysis prompted a preliminary SEC inquiry. There it was, the phrase that both protected and empowered her. The piece quoted Dana in carefully's non-committal language. We cannot comment on ongoing matters, but we appreciate the role whistleblowers play in preserving market integrity. Below the banner. A time-stamped correction note: Helios has placed CFO Vivian Ross on administrative leave pending investigation. The company's stock ticker trembled and slid in thin. Clean lines. Analysts began downgrading coverage. Calls buzzed through trading floors. Investors who had once toasted Helios's potential were now watching their portfolios take a hit. The law, when it arrives, is procedural and cold, but consequences are human. Within 48 hours of the article, Helios's board had suspended Vivian. The SEC announced they had opened a formal enforcement action. The Department of Justice confirmed they were monitoring developments. An internal Helios memo leaked effective immediately. Mr. Ethan Hale is relieved of duties pending review. The memo landed like a guillotine. Charlotte watched it unfold like someone watching a long-expected audit close out. She did not celebrate with triumphalism. She observed with the steady pragmatism of a scientist who had confirmed a hypothesis. Her phone vibrated a text from Dana Nicework. Proceed with caution. Then a different kind of vibration, the sound of a man at her office door. Ethan had always been quiet in the face of crisis when his career was intact. Panic made him loud. Now, his presence was smaller, reduced to a knock at the glass. Charlotte's receptionist knew, competent, discreet, looked at her, and the man threw thin, professional restraint. Mr. Hale is here to see you, she said. Charlotte didn't immediately stand. She folded her hands around her coffee, letting the moment align. Send him in. Ethan stepped through the door with the air of a man who had lost the script. His suit was the same expensive cut. His tie hung crooked. He looked 5 years older. The confident posture that once opened boardroom doors had been replaced by a hesitant shuffling, like a trader who's seen a portfolio evaporate. Charlotte, he said, the name out of habit and apology. He didn't know how to begin. He had rehearsed lines to defend himself, to blame systems, to plead ignorance. Charlotte had heard all those arguments before in deposition rooms and at SEC interviews. There is a particular timbre to excuses that never convinces a forensic accountant. They reveal multiplication tables in the gaps. Sit, she said. He obeyed, perched on the corner of a leather guest chair, hands clasped, for a moment. There was only the hum of the building elevators, distant phones, the city breathing. You're the one who did this, he said at last. You filed something. You gave them the documents? Charlotte smiled, but her smile was not warm. It was composed, like a judge about to read a verdict. She slid her laptop forward without looking up and tapped the screen. The display rotated toward him, a single line of text. Stark. White on black. Whistleblower claim Hale. Charlotte. Ethan's face shifted through disbelief, then realization, then a desperate, childlike plea. Please. Charlotte, I didn't know. Vivian, she said it was for structural flexibility. She said it was standard. I thought his voice broke on the last word. I thought I was helping the company. She let him finish. Then she said the thing she had practiced once in 1,000 quiet hours of analysis and grief. Next time you laugh at someone's seat at the table, she said, watching him closely. Make sure they didn't build the table. The words landed with an economy of fury that left no room for bargaining. Ethan looked down, his shoulders slumped. The man who had once smiled through investor presentations now looked like someone in the afterimage of a tantrum small, exposed, human. You don't understand what you've put me through, he whispered. My career? My career? She echoed softly. Do you know what it's like to be invisible because someone else defines your worth? To be the background noise while someone else racks up credit for your discipline? I made sacrifices so you could be ambitious. You chose to be complicit instead. He lifted his head, shame a raw thing on his face. Charlotte. Help me minimize the damage. Counsel wants to know if you can advise on which documents are harmful and which are he swallowed benign. I need to show cooperation. She watched the man who had once been a partner in a youthful plan. The calculus was simple: aid him and risk being entangled in his defense, refuse and watch as public scrutiny stripped away the remnants of their life together. In her desk drawer. The escrow papers and prenup clauses sat like cold tools of survival. Legal protection was in place. She had not placed them there to wield cruelty, but to ensure fairness. She was not naive. She closed the laptop. The dark screen reflecting Ethan's face ruined. Repentant. You forwarded confidential files. She said, you signed a document you should not have signed. You watched me be humiliated and did nothing? That's the series of choices that led here. Ethan reached for her hand, fingers trembling. Please. For us. For the life we built. Charlotte released a breath that might have been pity, or the small mercy of someone who could estimate damage without being consumed by it. I'll cooperate with counsel, she said finally. I'll provide a statement if it's accurate and not performance, but I will not be part of a cover-up. I will not protect your choices simply because you made them. He nodded. A small movement of surrender. Then he bowed his head. The physical act of a man accepting consequences, public and private. The sound of his intake of breath was almost a sob, the sound of a man losing more than a job. As he left, he paused at the door. I'm sorry, he said, the words simple and insufficient. Charlotte watched him go, and when the door closed, the hum of the city seemed louder for a moment, as if the world had adjusted to a new ledger. She opened her laptop again, scrolling through the SEC acknowledgement email. The whistleblower office had confirmed receipt, and the case number glowed like a legal landmark. Outside her window, the stock ticker reflected in the glass, Helios's line dipping into salmon red, in the quiet that followed. She allowed herself a single, private smile, not triumph, just equilibrium, proven in evidence. She typed a short note to Dana Fay as one contained. Proceed with civil remedies. Then she shut the laptop and stood, the room full of documents like a city of paper. The composition of her life had changed. Some losses were real and painful, but she had reclaimed what mattered: the authority of her intellect, the integrity of her name, and a future built on her terms. 6 months later, Boston had thawed into early summer. The glass skyline shimmered, and the storm that had once surrounded Helios Therapeutics was now just another cautionary tale whispered in compliance seminars and boardrooms. Inside the marble atrium of the Renaissance Financial Forum, cameras flashed and polite applause rippled as Charlotte Hale walked onto the stage. Her heels clicked with precision. Her navy suit was immaculate, and the lanyard around her neck bore a new title: Director of Compliance, Larkwell Capital. She paused at the podium, letting the murmuring crowd settle. Hundreds of faces: young analysts, seasoned bankers, journalists. Women from across the country looked up at her, waiting. The spotlight caught the faint glint of her ringless hand as she adjusted the microphone. 6 months ago, she began, voice calm but resonant. I stood in a very different kind of room. A gala where laughter was louder than integrity. A room where a woman's expertise was dismissed as decoration. That night, they called me something I will never forget. The room was silent now. Even the air felt still. They called me, she said slowly, a pathetic gold digger nobody. A few murmurs rippled through the audience. Charlotte smiled, unshaken. And I suppose, in a way, they were half right. I was digging, just not for gold. A few quiet chuckles, sympathetic, knowing. She leaned in slightly, eyes sharp but warm. I was digging for the truth. And the truth, as every forensic accountant knows, has a way of unearthing itself if you follow the numbers. Numbers don't lie, but they record who did. Applause started, building slowly. The sound of recognition rather than pity. Women in finance. She continued, have been told for decades that we're supporting roles. The quiet analysts, the detail checkers, the patient ones behind the big egos. But I've learned something: being underestimated is the most powerful position in any room. because no one sees you coming until it's too late. The lights caught the faint shimmer of her bracelet as she gestured, behind her. The conference screen projected her name alongside her talk's title, Integrity as Leverage, the Power of Seeing What Others Miss. She concluded softly, but with conviction. They called me a gold digger, turns out. She paused, the corners of her lips curving into a half smile. I was just mining for the truth. The audience rose to their feet. Applause thundered, echoing off the glass walls. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment that marked not just a career resurrection, but an evolution. Charlotte stepped back, calm amidst the sound, eyes bright under the stage light. After the panel, journalists surrounded her questions about Helios, about the SEC case, about how it felt. She gave them what they wanted: poise, clarity. A smile that revealed nothing but professionalism. Justice, she told one reporter, isn't about revenge, it's about restoration. By late afternoon, she slipped away to her office overlooking the harbor, her sanctuary. The sun burned soft orange over the water as she poured herself a glass of sparkling water and opened her inbox. At the top sat a new email from Dana Foster. SEC Enforcement Division, subject renew case. Insider whistleblower Charlotte Hale recommended for advisory role? Charlotte's eyebrows lifted. She opened it. Charlotte, we've reviewed your prior cooperation record. The Commission would like to bring you on as an external advisor for corporate transparency and ethics reform. Consider this formal notice of interest. If accepted, you'd be shaping future whistleblower frameworks. Dana Charlotte leaned back, exhaling slowly. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even vindication. It was legacy. The system that had once humiliated her was now asking for her counsel. She replied simply, "Let's talk." Meanwhile, in a sterile office deep within the SEC's Washington headquarters, Dana sat reviewing the day's correspondence. Her desk was neat except for a single envelope marked Federal Detention Center, Vivian Ross. She opened it, reading the handwritten note inside. The paper trembled slightly from someone who wasn't used to writing by hand. Dana, I'm willing to cooperate. I can provide insight on other trust-based schemes if the department considers a deal. Please, tell Charlotte I'm sorry. Vivian Ross? Dana smiled faintly, the kind of smile that comes from poetic timing. She folded the letter once, set it beside her monitor, and reached for her phone. A text to Charlotte. Guess who wants a cooperation deal? Should I entertain it? Charlotte's reply came less than a minute later. We'll let the truth decide. Dana chuckled to herself, murmuring, We'll let Charlotte decide, before sliding the letter into an evidence sleeve. That night, the Boston skyline shimmered in the water outside Charlotte's window. The city moved outside her window, steady and alive. She sat at her desk, reviewing a new compliance model proposal labeled the Whistle Clause Initiative. It was her own design, a system for protecting corporate truth-tellers, balancing ethics and accountability in the financial world. It would outlast any scandal, any humiliation, any headline. As the clock ticked past midnight, she closed the folder, turned off the desk lamp, and whispered into the stillness. No more surviving, only building. Outside. Dawn began to edge against the horizon, golden and clear. A sterile interrogation room. Vivian Ross, now in a gray suit and without makeup, sat across from her federal counsel. Her once perfect manicure was chipped. Across the table, a recorder blinked red. A door opened. Dana entered, file in hand, setting it on the table with quiet finality. Vivian looked up. Did Charlotte say anything? Dana's lips curved, half amusement, half justice. She said, We'll let the truth decide. Vivian's face fell the soft collapse of someone who finally realized she'd lost not just her empire, but her narrative. Dana clicked the pen. Now, let's talk about the other companies. The camera panned out, fluorescent lights humming, the sound of paper turning, the machinery of justice resuming its rhythm. Would you forgive or expose? Tell me in the comments. If you were in Charlotte's place, would you forgive or expose? Tell me in the comments. The screen faded to black, leaving the echo of Charlotte's final words behind. They called me a gold digger. Turns out, I was just mining for the truth.